we are privileged to have Matt Canlis with us. He's in one of these screens someplace. As soon as he makes a peep or makes a noise, his face will.
Hello, hello.
There he is. Okay, so there's Matt. Matt is, many of us have come to know Matt, not personally, but through the work of his short film, Godspeed. We've played it many times at some of the trainings that we have done as a way to attend to the fact that God is already at work. The passage, while a well-known one that we've used often, is an opportunity for us to kind of think again about the idea that when we are involved in ministry, we are not creating something that is not there. We are being faithful to the work of God already. And part of some of our major work is attending to our own stuff, our own formation, our communal formation in all this. And I think many of us, I'll speak personally, but I think this was shared by others, in watching the film, there was a sense of, I can't think of the right word for it, but encouragement, delight, invitation to relax a little more, with a recognition that God is up to something. And if I am not living in such a way where I'm attentive to what he is up to, I'll kind of have a tendency to miss out. It's not all about my projects, my emphases. And so as we're thinking about discernment today, it tends to be an ethereal concept for many people as we talk about it. But what we're getting at today is the idea that it's a very practical orientation of our own personal lives and our communal lives, and their skills that we develop in order to be able to more accurately and more effectively hear the voice of God among us, in each other, and in our neighborhood. So Matt has agreed to be part of this. Matt is the pastor of Trinity Episcopal Church in Wenatchee. It feels like there should be another syllable in there, but is that how you say it?
It's pretty good. Wenatchee.
Wenatchee. Oh, it sounds a little Chicago. Wenatchee, Washington. And so we're very glad to have you with us, Matt. So let's just jump right into, again, people can start preparing questions that you may want for Matt as we go along here. But beginning, why don't you just talk about the documentary, the film that you put together? Why? It was very impactful, at least in my world and in many of the people I talked to. And one of the, I'm sure it's impactful in many places, one of the reasons that you're here today. So talk about that impact, talk about your experience with it, and maybe why in the world did you do this in the first place? What motivated you? So have fun with that.
We made the film to bear witness to what God did in an ordinary place with ordinary people. You saw there was nothing fancy, there was nothing new, but what God did in that particular parish, God can do anywhere. So it bore witness to a story. The film was also a shot across the bow of the church plant movement. I grew up in Seattle, where the church plant movement got much of its modern momentum, and some good came of this. But sadly, I've seen mostly two fruits of modern church planting. One, they either fail or they succeed and then fail. And I'm not sure which one's worse. What I do know is I see both produce burnt out pastors, burnt out congregation, disillusioned kids growing up in that atmosphere, and disillusioned neighbors and non-Christians who want no part of our busyness. In Scotland, I was made part of a healthy place and a healthy people. And I'll follow this track across the next few weeks. What do geography and persons have to do with our mission? So Godspeed bore witness to how even I could be changed by Christ in these ways. It was also because, frankly, my brother called and my friend Danny called and said, Matt, we got to make a film. And part of the miracle of the film is that everything was shot live. There were no actors. These are just ordinary people who somehow stayed natural, even though we stuck a camera in their face, which I think bears witness to their ease in where they are and who they are. And it bears witness to Danny, the filmmaker, who kept us all feeling normal, which was amazing. And then finally, Godspeed was a confession. I hope you don't think it's like the new thing to do. Godspeed was a confession of how I struggle to live at the speed of Christ and how Jesus is helping me change. So those are some things. Bearing witness to what God did in ordinary place. 3 friends having some fun making a film. A shot across the bow of modern church planting, and a confession that I'll talk more about.
Thanks, Matt. I have really appreciated your authenticity in the conversations that we've had this weekend. I think really in the film, and I think that's one of the things that probably sticks out to people is, as you said, it's kind of this ordinary place where people are doing life, and we get to see God at work. And in the film and in the devotional, the Backyard Pilgrims book that we'll talk more about later, one of the things that we have seen as a strong emphasis is the formational side of life. And there's a lot of emphasis in both about life with God and being known by God and being known by others. And I know for me, that's been a struggle in my missional journey of what does it look like to be known and to let people know me. And so I was wondering if you could speak to 2 things on that. One is, why is that so important, and a little bit of your own journey, because I'm guessing it didn't just happen overnight. But also throughout the film especially, there's just that sense of deep belonging. And one of the ladies towards the end mentions how she belongs to Udney, and just kind of that idea of like, this is my place, this is where I'm known. And I think probably few of us would actually be able to say that there is somewhere that they are deeply rooted and they are known. And so, yeah, what does your journey look like with that, but also the importance of that rootedness and being known for mission?
Thank you, Sarah May. Yeah, the pace of being known. Everyone wants to be known, but how do we move at a speed at which we know God, we know others, and we know ourselves in Christ? I'm sure you all have noticed that in the Bible, God walks a lot. That's the speed at which God moves. We see it in the opening scenes of Genesis, when God comes walking in the garden in the cool of the day. We see this in Jesus Christ, who walked everywhere. Except for his brief ride on a donkey Palm Sunday, Jesus was always walking, talking, visiting neighbors. He probably gardened in his own backyard. I see him leaning over the fence, not a white picket fence, but maybe a stone wall. But this speed was not exceptional. Jesus, as the incarnate God, was not saying, oh, I'm slowing down for you. He was revealing the speed at which God is always moving, is my belief. So to be known, you have to move at a speed that makes that possible. Now, I'm not trying to give the impression that I'm always walking, I'm always chill. No, there's a time to soar on wings like eagles, run, but not grow weary, walk, and not grow faint. So I hope you don't think Godspeed is a call to just slow down. But there is a time for everything. And if walking is not a part of your rhythm, then you will burn out. And Paul picks up on all these ideas in his letters. And we won't get into it today, but in 1 Corinthians 13, when he says, one day we shall see face to face. Now I know only in part. One day I shall know fully, even as I'm fully known. He's anticipating the day Christ returns and he encounters all the saints and the fullness of the Trinity, and being known in the way he's learning to be known on earth by walking around, which is what Paul did. Now, Paul was often on the move, but you forget about the fact that every night there was no electricity and he was dining around a fire, telling stories and talking. Every Sabbath, he was at rest, honoring the Sabbath. I bet Paul, for all his missional zeal and movement, led a healthier life than many North Americans today. And of course, that's because he was rooted in Christ, who modeled the same thing. So I just want to raise questions about how do we get known by asking about the speed at which we live and being known by people. You can't be known on your own. It's obvious, but we forget this. And in ministry, you're often modeling individualism in ways that are completely counter-Christian. That's the first thought. You also asked about the woman who said, I belong to Udney. This is Mrs. French, who lived in Methlick at the time and had been there about 40 years. Udney is only a few miles away, and she still conceived of herself as belonging to this place. But place is one of the undervalued gifts of God in evangelical Christianity. Eugene always used to tell me, Matt, the antidote is near the poison. Don't go looking far for the antidote God has given you near the poison that you are and need to be cured of. And so Psalm 16:6 is a key verse for me. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Now, I've not always welcomed those boundary lines, but now there are 5 that I make central geographical allies to my life in Christ. And here they are. First, the manse, or your home. Godspeed starts at home. If you're not living at a speed at which you know your spouse, your kids, your friends, if you're living in community, don't bother doing your stuff at church. It starts at home. So my home is the place where I live out my first calling as, in my case, a husband and a father. That's the geographical ally. And when I go home, I'm not a pastor, I am a husband and a father. So that's where it begins. That's my first geographical ally. By the way, I worked on geographical allies because I found I could not manage my time in abstract, especially if I lived on my phone. There were too many voices, too many hats coming in. I do have an iPhone, and I actually really like it as a tool. But these geographical allies remind me who I am by telling me where I am. I'm at home. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. That's the first one. The second ally is your workplace. For me, that's a pastor at the church. And when I come into church, I become pastor. And I love my job as a pastor because it's secondary to my identity as a father and a husband. Third is a place called the glebe. That's Glebe, which is a Scottish word meaning dirt or chunk of soil. Back in the day in Scotland, before you received a salary, you were given a glebe, which is a piece of land attached to the manse that you had to work with your own hands to produce food. So that when you prayed on Sunday for the good weather and the farmers, you weren't praying for them, you were praying for food on your own table. It also helped the man of the cloth and the man of the word be a man of the earth, getting his hands dirty. So if you were wealthy, you would hire servants to work your fields. But many Church of Scotland ministers themselves were farmers with their wife and kids working in the glebe. I don't have a glebe right now. And until COVID, it was the YMCA where I worked out 3 or 4 times a week. Right now, it's the hill behind my house, which I try and climb. But in the glebe, I'm an embodied human being doing physical work, physical exercise. And you need a glebe. And you've got one in your own parish. You just got to name it, and you got to go there. The fourth place is your study. I'm in my study right now. And in a study, I am a student. The life of not just pastors, but any child of God needs to require studying. Now, if you're an artist, that might be a studio with your paintbrush. If you're a musician, it might be your cello beside you. But this is the place that cultivates the life of the mind and the heart. So find your study and spend time there. And then finally, the font. In my Anglican case, it's a baptismal font, although we baptize people out in the river. But then every time we come to church, we cannot enter the church without first remembering that we are a child of God. And the font reminds me who I am. Even prior to being a husband or father, I'm God's child. And so whether the shower I take in the morning to remind me of my baptism, or dipping my hand in the water to remind me of my baptism, I'm continually letting the geographical gift of the font and water return me to being God's child first. So when Mrs. French said, I belong to Udney, she had those 5 places in her village, in her life, that told her where she was and who she was. And those are completely connected. We need to reconnect ourselves to our place and thus to the gifts God has given us to tell us who we are and how to be the different people we need to be, because we have different callings, all rooted in Christ, in geography. Great question, Sarah May.
Yes, indeed. Was it glebe? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, glebe.
You could, some enterprising individuals here could create a glebe fitness center in their town, just as
It's a great idea.
A glebe, a glebe community garden or something like that.
Would you spell
thank you for
that
that
for us?
Glebe.
Oh, thank you.
Glebe.
Thanks for that, Matt. So let's zero in a little more on the whole discernment thing. When people talk about discernment, they're often talking about there's a big decision to make. Do we hire a youth pastor, or do we build another building, or do we do a congregational or constitutional change? These kinds of things that come up, big strategy initiatives, and all that's good and important, and we have to make those kinds of decisions, and people are wondering, how do we hear God's voice in this? Also at the same time, and perhaps far more importantly, is a recognition, as we see in our passage this morning, that God is already at work. He is up to something. He is doing things in our neighborhood. And as I understand, one of the major themes of Godspeed is that we have to slow down sufficiently, or be attentive sufficiently, so we are aware of that. So how do we take this concept of discernment out of the stratosphere, out of this ethereal concept, and make it practical in our day-to-day lives? And as you emphasize so much in the Backyard Pilgrim, the whole importance of our own personal and communal formation, and how do we avoid the trap that many do in speaking of formation as something distinct from mission, so that we end up really good on self-awareness and communion with God, but somehow we lose our sense of belonging in a community. So could you talk about practically, in the details of congregational life, my own personal life, how this discernment thing works?
Yes. I like that you're coupling mission with discernment, but making sure that our mission flows from discerning questions about who we are and where we are first. Biblical discernment, for me, begins in Ecclesiastes 3 and asking, what time is it? What season are we in? There is a time and a season for everything and for every activity under heaven. In February of last year, we launched a book called The Backyard Pilgrim, knowing that our church had become too committed to its building and not being enough out in the neighborhood of realizing we're supposed to be witnessing to Christ. That was on February 29th, and we called it our Leap Day launch. And the theme was, this leap year, I know 2020 is known for many things, but it was a leap year, we forget that. This leap year, get ahead by slowing down. We almost made that a billboard in town, and I wish we had, because it would have been the most prophetic statement we could have ever have given. We discerned as a community that we had to get outside the walls of the church. We had no idea that we'd be doing that for the next 10 months. The reason that happened is because I'm on a team of people who have been slowly asking, why are we in this place, and who are we, and how can we live out who we're supposed to be in the particular place that we are. I want to point you to Philippians 1, verse 9, which has been a key verse for us in the last year and a half. And it's Paul saying, "This is my prayer, that your love may grow." And this is the triple love of love for God, love for neighbor, and love for ourselves in Christ. May your love grow more and more in knowing and true wisdom, so that you may be able to discern what is best. And notice a few things about that passage. First, his main prayer is that your love will grow. Jesus himself warned us that in the end times, the love of most will grow cold. So Paul's prayer for discernment is to increase your wise love, right? So it's about love, so that you can discern what is best. So there's your discernment piece. And notice that the you is not singular. This is not singular discernment, Matt and God. This is to a community of people who discern things together so that you can discern what is best. Now, this is not talking about, do I commit adultery or not? This is not black and white things. This is Paul empowering a group of people to together discern what is best. Questions about, how do we gather? What does mission look like? What time is it right now? So that might be a key phrase for all of you trying to discern things in your churches. This is my prayer, that your love will grow more and more in knowing and being known and true wisdom, so that you can discern what is best. Now, what's important to me about that is not that you figure out a new church strategy, but that you start with where you are and who you are in Christ. Does that get the ball rolling on discernment? And do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, indeed. Sarah, before you jump in, you can follow up on that. I think you've got some things you want to play with there. Want to remind everyone, this is a really good time to begin to ask some of your more specific questions for Matt as to how this process of discernment, being known, knowing, work out in your community. So you can start typing those and actually throw them into the chat. Sarah, I'll throw it back to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think to follow up, Matt, on what you're talking about what that has looked like for you guys in this season, I think one of the themes that's come up for us over the last few months as we've met is that I think we've all been noticing that there are shifts that need to be taking place with how we do some of our church life. And when COVID hit, that really accelerated that in a lot of different ways. And so it wasn't necessarily new change, but we more so became aware of what might need to happen. And I think for a lot of our churches, that means a culture shift for our leaders and also the congregation in terms of what it looks like for us to live this out actively. And so we wanted just to hear a little bit about what your experience has been with your own personal church and what that has looked like as you have gone out into the community, but also maybe some of the things that you are seeing with other churches that you've been doing some work with as they kind of decentralize and they're just more out of the building with people.
Right. I believe that the main question that all churches need to be asking right now actually begins with individuals. I don't want to knock individuals, but I want individuals to ask, who am I? And all of you who've had to face massive changes in what you do need to start with who you are. So who am I? There's an identity crisis happening right now. And you're right, COVID just sped it up. We knew that at the beginning of 2020 and we were wrestling with it, but it sped it up. And if my identity in Christ is not first resting in being his beloved child, I am lost. And perhaps more lost than I was before I was a Christian, because I've lost the essence of who I am in Christ. And I'm probably making up for it by stuff I'm doing or people I'm even trying to save into my own busyness. And they're not buying, and they're right to not be buying. because I've betrayed my own calling. So what time is it? It's a time to ask, who are you? That's the first thing. And adopting a new church strategy is only going to make another idol. I need to recover my adoption as God's child in Christ. I need to recover my baptism. Did any of you know that I, Matt Canlis, am in Christ, the Son of God? And I hope that sounds a little heretical, but it's how John puts it in the Gospels, that we have been made children of God. And if that is not your resounding understanding of yourself as the beloved child, you are lost and you have nothing to give, a world of orphans. If the desert of COVID achieves nothing else than helping you recover who you are in Christ, it's worth it. So that's the first thing. Each Christian needs to ask, who am I? The second thing is churches need to ask, who are we and where are we? And you'll always see me prioritizing personhood and geography so that mission and strategy will flow. In our own church, at the end of Godspeed, there's that mural. You'll probably forget it, but there's this picture of, it's actually just down the street on Peachy right here. It's our corner market. It's a store, a small business trying to stay alive right now. And that mural is of people walking together, holding hands. When I first came to Wenatchee, I walked down to that sign, and in Spanish and English, it says, God could have chosen anyone to be here. He chose you. God could have chosen anyone to be here. There's geography. He chose you. That's personhood. So our church has been walking down to that corner shop and asking two questions. And you're not allowed to go alone. You always have to go with somebody else, back to the 2x2 thing that began this whole start of the day. And you ask, why us and why here? So why us in particular? What are my gifts? What are my strengths after I'm resting in being God's child? And secondarily, why here in particular? God's first question in the Bible is, who knows it? Where are you? It's a geographical question. We'll talk about that in the weeks to come. So that's what time it is. And it's time to discern, who am I? I'm God's child. And then who are we? Who's the community I'm a part of? And who has God made us to be in this particular place to join him in the harvest? And we just need a few more workers who understand their identity and then partner. And it's game over. It's all accomplished in Christ. We're just failing to receive what he's trying to give.